Welcome back to the Digital Accessibility Podcast. If you're looking to learn more about the field of accessibility, how to implement it within your role or your company, or to get advice on where to start or see how others have navigated complex issues that you may find along the way, then you're in the right place. I'm honoured to be able to share these insightful chats with thought leaders, advocates and practitioners of digital accessibility throughout this podcast, and I hope you'll find it a useful resource. As always, thank you so much for listening. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Mark Lapole, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, Director of Digital Accessibility at eBay. Mark is an accessibility and user experience leader who is constantly working to make things useful, usable for all people. With over 15 years at eBay in various roles, culminating in becoming their Director of Accessibility back in 2020, Mark is recognized within the accessibility world as a true leader, fighting the good fight, attempting to have maximum and global impact. So welcome to the podcast, Mark.
Thanks for having me, Joe. Appreciate it.
No problem. So I guess to get started, we always like to hear about our guest's personal journey. So what really sort of sparked your initial interest?
Yeah, so when I get asked this question, typically I think back to, well, let's just say I've been working in this web space a rather long time, we'll say, without revealing age, but it's been a while. So back in the days when things started, we'll say, where you were doing a little bit of everything and trying to find your way around what you wanted to do, what resonated with you, where you thought you would land, essentially. I always enjoyed tech and creating and building things. And so I found my way out of college working for a small sort of web shop. And this was the time where we were, I don't know if your listeners will get this, or you maybe, Joe, but like this time where you were kind of just creating a lot of marketing type websites. They were really informational sites, for lack of a better word. And standards didn't really exist. This is pre-Wik. When was WCAG? 99. So we'll just say it was right around there. It was a little before, though. They weren't as popular as they are now, we'll say. So as part of a little project we had, we worked with a nonprofit local chapter for the Special Olympics, where I was based out of the Eastern US. And as part of that project, we had to shadow the volunteers and some of the athletes themselves. And so it was interesting to see that at an early stage in my career, we'll say. Also, this is a time where you didn't even know if that would be your career. So you're just trying to establish your footing, I guess, in a way. And so whatever we observed, we were going to take back to work in in this project. Like, how can we create a site that represents what we observed? So it was a bit of a field study, if you want to call it that. So that helped me very early on, and just got me exposed to a little different way of navigating the world, we'll just say, in general. And so it wasn't the days of these nice slim laptops that we have, or these silicone obsessions that we have in our pockets. So it was this, how do we just understanding that. And so, in fact, I don't remember a lot about the project itself. It's really the people that I engaged with just during that little exercise. And then, of course, we moved on to other clients and everything else. But that one project, I think, struck a nerve, or it resonated somehow with us as a small team of a bunch of 20-somethings working on this thing called the internet and creating sites. And so, that early exposure really just sticks in my mind. And so I tried to bring that approach to any design work or development work that I've done over the years. These days, I don't do much at all designing and developing, but that's the sort of mindset that that experience had creating in me. So
incredible. And I guess that, like you say, the impact that's had, that simple sort of project that you didn't even know at the time would have so much impact on you throughout your career and even through to today. I know obviously you may have gone down different routes beyond that, but to think you're still talking about it today, it just shows that we really do need to integrate with people from all different backgrounds and abilities, because look at the impact it can have on someone.
Yeah, it was
amazing.
Very good.
Perfect. So eBay, or
Yeah.
eBay accessibility. I put a little acronym in our pre-notes for the show. But so I'd like to ask what eBay's doing differently. What sets them apart from other global organizations? There's a few questions here, I realize, I'm sorry. But what's helped guide your decision to return to work with them after separate stints? I know you worked with Google and Thomson Reuters as well.
Yeah. I don't, I guess this could be a bit of a personality thing, but I don't know if there's a lot that we do different per se, some air quotes there, but um, the point about why I returned is an interesting one, maybe. I've always felt that eBay's purpose was really something that I enjoyed being around, we'll say. So, I mean, I'm not going to quote it exactly. I'm sure I'll mess it up, which would be embarrassing as an eBay employee for all these years. But it's essentially to connect people and communities and create economic opportunity for all, something along those lines. And so the fact that we have this culture or this internal sort of DNA, we'll say, about how we impact and affect people's livelihood, in some cases, literal livelihoods, because they rely on eBay for primary or even supplemental income in some ways. And we all know the high unemployment rate among the disability community is a thing. So something about that really resonates with me. And over the years, I just enjoy being around that and just the opportunity to have that impact on so many people. Now that might feel a little corporate-y response because it's aligned with our purpose and all that, but um, it's also the people that we work with. The culture at eBay is very much one of mutual respect from my experience. And most everybody I meet, and oftentimes we realize we're not always the deliverers of good news. We're oftentimes saying, hey, nice to meet you, but those screens and those flows you work on and that UI or that user experience we're putting out there for people that we want to use, we want them to use it. Yeah, you got these 20 issues or these 50 issues or sometimes these severe issues or whatever the number is. So even with the delivery of that information, for the most part, people respond, wow, I didn't realize. Thanks for letting me know. How can I fix this? Let's get it into our queue. That sort of mentality is more refreshing than having to constantly respond to why are we doing this work? Who uses assistive technology? And they wouldn't say that, but who uses a screen reader? What do you mean? People listen to content on the screen, or people need to only use the keyboard, or people don't use their limbs, or they actually speak to the UI. So like having to justify regularly is a lot less of what we do now. So people was another reason to return. But I would say, I guess back to the differentiating bit, I don't know. Again, it's a personality thing. I don't think we're unique or special in any way, but I do enjoy the transparency that we bring to this work. And so I've been at other places where we're a little bit more, well, we can't say that in public, or let's keep that to ourselves. And I'm like, I don't want to be around that type of environment. I want to make sure that, having even these conversations, I mean, uh, attending those small conferences where we meet and network with people and sharing our challenges and how we approach problems, like that's the world I want to be in. So I guess, I mean, we do the standard stuff as a program. We do the training. We do the monitoring of apps. We have regular audits. We still do those. I think it's important. But the raising awareness, the empathy sessions, like constantly thinking about where we inject accessibility in our design and development process and release process. But I guess if I had to say two things that maybe stand out in my time would be um, our eBay mind patterns and eBay UI core components. Like I'm calling that one thing, by the way, but that exposing that content and that uh, information out for the community to use. It's all open sourced. It's instant. It's publicly available. And then the second thing I would say is um, we recognize a gap in design and skill set and awareness of accessibility, like a lot of companies probably have. But there are some people in the design community that have great experience with accessibility, and so we tried a few times internally to think about how do we account for accessibility during design, and how do we get this a little more standardized so that when designers start that conversation with engineers, they have a basis of direction essentially, so that the engineers aren't forced to come up with it on their own, or PMs don't have to think about, like, I mean, everyone should think about it. There's some shared responsibility. I'm sure we're in agreement there, but how do things get more thoughtfully put into our design specking process? And so we partnered, our core accessibility team partnered with a design technology lead. We have a small design tech team internally, and one of our designers in the design org who just had a really good systems view and perspective, and she had accessibility experience where she came from. And so this small working group created a Figma plugin called INCLUDE. And the primary goals of that were, of course, the output of annotating for accessibility, but also to have a bit of training in there. It's like learning along the way so that it can help designers sort of form a little bit of that accessibility muscle. So I'd say those two things kind of stand out. Also, that Figma plugin is publicly available for the Figma community, and we know that's a popular tool for designers to use. So I guess that's kind of a long-winded way to say I think I like how eBay's open to being open and sharing what we've done. And we don't think it's perfect. I mean, it's gotten really good reviews, and it seems to have hit a sweet spot with some designers who are striving or maybe struggling in some ways to find ways to adequately annotate for accessibility. So I think that's a combination of all of those things. So the people, the corporate purpose, and the openness, I think, really main reasons why I chose to return.
Well, I mean, now I want a job at eBay, so you've sold it well. So I'm sure they'll be happy with you with your reply.
Well, we put a lot of sweat equity, I guess, into the work. I mean, we've been at it for a few years, so I guess there's probably some level of that. I'm like, I hope that what we started to build years back isn't falling apart, and it was a good opportunity. And also timing. I can't rule out timing, right? There were some things going on in my life at the time, and I was like, Then you get contacted from your former employer, and they say, "Hey, what are you up to?" And I'm like, "Why are you texting me?" So like,
come back, we need you. But I mean, it's not really nice to hear that there's an empathetic sort of nature, it sounds, across the board at eBay, because they're open to that sort of, or there's a mature approach to being open to trying different things and understanding things from a different perspective, I suppose. Does that kind of explain what you mean there with the people and the approaches?
Yeah, a bit, because it leads to good, interesting conversations, because we approach the work not as, we know we're just one thing on a list of competing priorities for product teams. Like, it's not like we're shut off to that. And in the same vein, then we get exposed to, oh, we didn't even realize you had these other things that you had to consider, or whatever requirements they may be working under. We're sensitive that we don't want to just be piling onto that. So I think that's the bit of that sort of mutual respect or willingness to learn, or open mindset to just say, okay, I didn't realize, okay, this is what it is. Let's move forward. It's not about blame. It's not about looking back, or, well, this code's been there for 5 years, or like, okay, well, it's been bad for 5 years, and maybe I don't know what to tell you. So like, let's fix it. Let's figure that out. So
I think there's a lot of that. I mean, so I tend to make this comparison just because previously I've worked in the information security or cybersecurity space about 10 years ago. And at that time, they were seen as like the developer police. They were putting blockers like, you can't release this because it's going to impact the security of the entire system. So that was more like cut and shut. You are not releasing until you fix these errors. And I know it's not quite that with accessibility, but there's an element of some designers or developers going, oh God. But then, because you can't always just assume that people are going to go, I don't want them to come and tell me no, so I'm just going to do the thing, because there's time constraints. There's other reasons why maybe they've tried to find a workaround. But maybe we can learn a bit from the information security. I mean, obviously that had other factors at play with security issues and high risk, but there's still just as much risk in this space. So yeah, I'm trying to draw that comparison.
It is kind of a balance at the end of the day, I guess, because that's a good analogy to use, because internally we'll talk about, well, actually I should say industry, well, at least in a lot of the roles I've had, we'll talk about availability. Like, that's up. if your product or services aren't available, who cares if it's inaccessible? So like we talk about that sort of, I don't know if you say prioritization, but then security is right up there, right? Safety and
Yeah.
security. So privacy, all these things that are sort of related. So there are sometimes conversations where we will nudge accessibility into that world of thinking and just say, hey, we expect this to be available for all people. We expect it to be usable for all people. We expect the ability for, we have to enable the ability or the option for people to consume our content on whatever device or however they choose to interact with that screen. So in some ways it's related to that. So yeah, that's a good analogy.
I appreciate that. That's good. I'm pleased I wasn't just talking nonsense. So we've on the podcast we've mentioned or discussed champions networks in companies at length, and how they can be beneficial for some larger organizations that might have limited budget, limited buy-in from decision makers. Unfortunately, we've spoken about the experience that you had at eBay, and it wasn't quite as positive. So if you're happy to, could you just expand on that for our listeners, as it'd be nice to see it from a variety of different perspectives.
Yeah. So we are a small team. It's probably not a surprise to some people. Well, maybe it is to some people. They think eBay's a medium to large company. They should have a reasonably sized team, but we don't. We have 4 main people that are part of the core accessibility team for the entirety of the company. And one of those people actually have other responsibilities as well. So if you really broke it down, it's maybe 3.5 people. So naturally, we think about then how do we get our advocates throughout the product org and PM, design, engineering, and have them essentially be your champions in their worlds, in their day-to-day stand-ups or their reviews or what have you. And then we're always here for additional support like we are anyway. But how do we upskill some of our staff to become those champions out in the wild, so to speak? We've had 2 attempts at this, and very disappointingly, neither survived. And so we're in this, I would say there's some remnants though that I think maybe puts us, I'll talk about that in a moment, but puts us in a maybe okay position. So initially we had this grand idea, hey, let's implement some sort of champions program. What does that look like? I don't know. Let's put some framework around it. What kind of cadence will we have? Will there be levels that champions can progress within? I spoke to some of my peers in the industry, Intuit, I don't want to say famously, but it's pretty common. Like Ted Drake implemented a really great accessibility at least from the outside. It seems great. I don't know if it's true inside, but I have some former colleagues that work there now, and we catch up from time to time. And so we asked how other people were implementing things, and we try to borrow some of that stuff. But at the end of the day, I think a few things happened. One, I take full responsibility. I don't think we gave it enough attention. I think in hindsight, it should probably have been like either the main goal or like one of the top 2 goals for the year. Like give yourself time to implement it properly. Get the buy-in from people that want to be champions, get the buy-in from their managers, make sure it's tied to their goals. It's a percentage of their time. Make sure they have that commitment. One problem we faced was that when we announced it, we had a few managers that were kind of excited to get their teammates involved in something, we'll say adjacent to their roles, but impacted their roles. So they were essentially voluntelling people, like you're voluntold, like, hey, Mark's trying to get this champions program up. You're our accessibility champion. And the person was like, what, me? And so not an effective, we want people that are interested about the work and passionate about it, obviously. But so we had some folks in the group like that then were just a little silent because they weren't quite sure, like, well, my manager told me to do this, I guess I should do it. And not a right mentality. So there's probably some of that fall off there. And then just just continuing it just kind of fizzled out. It was very, it's very, very disappointing. But I'll talk about the remnants for a moment. So from that little exercise, and after I'd already left the company and returned, I still have people that come on Slack that I recognize their names from that initial attempt. And so you could argue, but now maybe they were the passionate ones already and they saw the value in the work and how it would help even build their portfolio to a degree, or their resume, and say, because we also said that it's a newish skill set for you to learn. If you're not familiar with it, learn it, take it to the next product team you go to or the next company you go to. We don't care. Like it should, help grow the community in general and improve accessibility for wherever these people end up. I saw in one of your previous podcasts, you're talking about education and school and like getting things in the curriculum. That's a whole different topic, but it's not all that different that once you get to a new company and you start to learn new things about the company and how it's organized and where you can have impact. This is something you can take with you, whatever your role is. So it doesn't matter if you end up in procurement or marketing or sales or, what have you. I think that, and so of course I'm a little biased, probably. But it didn't seem to matter. It didn't seem to matter how lightweight we made the work, as it were, or the expectations. Yeah, it just kind of faded. And again, I take responsibility for that. We didn't keep it going. We didn't have the energy or the time or focus to give. I don't think to give it proper foundation, we'll say, for longevity. There was no sort of solid plan in place or anything like that. But it's nice to see people that were part of that original cohort, if you will, and still either serving that role as advocate for their team or now have gotten promoted over the years to now say for their team, hey, have we considered this? Or I'm not quite sure about that. Have you checked with the core accessibility team? And so like, that's a little refreshing to see in some way, but it's not. Definitely, I definitely view it as a failure, and I'm fine talking about it. It's a little embarrassing, but it was an attempt. Oh, and I'd probably be remiss if I didn't mention when I talked to other peers, and when I mentioned Intuit earlier, I do think it's a bit of company culture could impact the success of an internal champions program. I mean, I know I've spoken with other folks who have essentially volunteers that kind of make up their program, and like they as accessibility program leads, they feel like they can call on them at any time. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm so jealous immediately when I hear that. I'm like, well, how amazing would that be? Like, I could just go out to our buyer experience team and just say, hey, you got these 5 or 10 volunteers, whatever the number would be, and whatever you need, you have an event coming up, or you're hosting an empathy session or what have you, and you have help. That'd be amazing. So
Yeah.
a little disappointed with that one, but okay to talk about it. So yeah, no problem.
It's nice that you've shared that though, because I think that you're probably in a similar boat to a lot of other companies or a lot of other leaders in that space as well. Because I do think you can't take all the responsibility on yourself. Because I mean, maybe hold auditions, then you can have people that genuinely are interested in joining and but it's I guess it's a huge undertaking. I know Heather Hepburn has spoken at length about Champions Networks and how valuable they are to her as well, and growing it beyond Skyscanner and into their partners and things like that. So I guess that the growth of the culture and I guess training materials and what you can sort of give back, and it's a bit of a carrot and stick sometimes, isn't it? And it sounds like with the you being voluntold, I quite like that word. I'm going to start using that, I think. But I'm not going to volunteer people, don't worry.
Actually, it's funny you mentioned Heather's name. That's who came to mind, because I only recently joined CAN like a year ago or so, and I know you've talked about that previously, and that's a great network of people, and we have a lot of friends there, but a lot of European-based friends, but they're global. Like it's amazing how that's grown in the last year and a half or so. So like, yeah, Heather, Charlie, and Gareth, but that, I don't know how it all originated, but it's nice. But yeah, I talked to her at a recent at TechShare Pro in London, and she was sharing how she, I won't say leverages, she didn't use that word, but like how she has access to these internal champions. I'm like, what? And it baffled me.
It's like an unofficial team of people that you technically not even borrowing budget from other people's teams. It's like, if you've got time, can you just advocate for this, or just mention it at every opportunity?
So maybe that's the bit of the company culture bit, I think. So maybe if that's the mentality of your workforce, we do have some of that, but it's just kind of finding the pockets of that. And, it all feels additive in some way to people's roles. They're focused in their areas and what they have to get accomplished, and, different pressures for different teams and so on.
Definitely. But brilliant. I mean, thank you for sharing. And I mean, anyone that's listening that might have some advice or can help with that moving forward, then I hope they'll reach out and do what they can to help it.
Yeah.
But cool. So talking about additional help beyond your team of 3.5 people, let's call it that. I'd love to know a bit more about the external support that eBay gets from specialist consultancies. I know that there's some large and small ones around that offer help. Some of them have been on the podcast and some may be in the future. But yeah, with that small team, how does the external consultancy support sort of complement and sort of just help your own efforts?
Yeah. A lot. They help a lot. So yeah, we worked with a few vendors over the years. You probably could imagine, just like a lot of your listeners, maybe, or your callers, or your interviews also. The main ways they help out are with program related things. So, our ongoing manual audits, I mentioned that earlier. Like, yes, we still do those. I think it's important to have a bit of a pulse on how things are and the things that you're building, and make sure that they get looked at from a little bit more of an objective perspective, not just us internally. Of course, training sessions, they help us run some of these empathy sessions. They do feature testing for newer things that we're building, where product teams are like, hey, we don't really have the time to test this. Can you look at it a little more closely? Hey, Mark, can you test this? No, Mark is not going to test it fully, and not well enough probably than what you're going to get from this vendor. So let's leverage some of those hours. So those things are the types of work that we engage with them on. Also, oftentimes they can give us a bit of perspective from other clients and what they're seeing in the space, whether that has to do with testing methodologies, or even granular things that we start to talk about when we talk about browser AT combos to test for, or scenarios that they're maybe seeing for other experiences. So, hey, this doesn't seem to be working in Chrome and JAWS, but it does work in Firefox and NVDA. Or this behaves oddly in this iOS app, but yours seems to work right. Then they maybe make this connection. Or this component behaves this way on iOS, but not this way on Android. And then we talk through some of that stuff. So a range of assistance, we'll say. No, I'm not foolish to think that we'll always have budget for a vendor. And so, that comes to mind. So I try to be a little, we'll just say, aware of that, and how we manage the relationship with the vendors that we work with. Yeah.
Fair enough. And I guess, so secondary point on that. For me, as someone that's trying to help companies like yours hire accessibility professionals and bring things in-house, I don't like to think of myself as a competitor to consultancies, but I guess some people might see it that way, taking work away from them. So on that point, I just wondered if you think that there's always going to be a need. I mean, I believe so too, but do you think there will always be a need for external consultancies to help on these things? Or do you think that is there an ideal world out there that we're all going to have internal teams that act as internal consultancies for our own individual organization or our own needs?
I mean, I guess we could be hopeful. My reaction's probably obvious if you're seeing that. I guess a little. I mean, I think both. I mean, I always imagine there will be a need for external consultancies for any type of work, you could argue. And it's going to probably come down to a bunch of factors, and it depends answer, but depends on the company size or the company staff skill set, maybe even their commitment to the work. And it's always, for the most part, at least, and this isn't probably just true of Americans, but or US companies, but it's going to come down to budget at the end of the day. What do we want to put your effort? So on the skill set bit, if you have a staff that's not all that skilled in something, of course you're going to, I would think, very likely look toward external consultancies to help fill that. Or if you have, it depends, unique needs. Again, I'm going to say it depends a lot, but if you don't have a program in place and you want to get some guidance from a consultancy that's done that and they can stand that up really quickly, and hey, we can bring in a team of 2 people or 10 people or whatever your needs are, company, and of course we'll charge you for that. But at the same time, I used to have and maybe this is a bit of hindsight, but I used to have this sort of narrow-minded view, which a little bit connects with the last bit you said. I used to think, why are we paying these consultant companies? We can do this work. We have smart engineers, we have smart designers, we have great PMs. Why aren't we building that internal muscle? And so I guess there's part of that still that it's still in my mind. It's that sort of can-do attitude, like, and maybe that has to do with how you were raised or how your career evolved over the years. But I've come to accept that there's plenty that you can't do internally, and that you may not have this unique skill set for. Not that accessibility is a unique skill set. In some ways it is, in some ways it isn't. But it's okay to ask for help. And if you get funding to do that, go do that, because then they can help alleviate some of that internal stress you might face on your own had you chosen to do it yourself. I still think we can build that internal muscle. That's still but it's just kind of further back in my mind now. I'm like, okay, well, Mark, that ship has probably sailed. So let's figure out how to leverage the funding we have and work with the right vendor at the right time that provides the right service for what we need at that moment. And so, yeah, it's I like to think in the act of engaging with consultants over the years that it actually has had that internal effect, and internalizing of what it is we need to do and how we need to improve our processes or practices overall. At the same time, I also see teams may just rely on it and just say, I don't need to do that because Mark's already told me we have hours to use with this consulting firm. So like, like, yes, we do, but we may not have those, or we may be running light, or they're overwhelmed and your lead time has now become a 2-week or 3-week out thing and you need it in 4 days. So now you're gonna have to do it. So I don't know, a bit of a rambling answer, but yeah, I think there'll always be need for both. I don't see consulting companies going away for sure. So you're safe. You're good.
Yeah, well, I hope so. But I guess in a way they also help to hold you accountable. Like that comment you said about they working with competitors as well most of the time, so they can actually give you some comparison, but also, we came in last time we did X, Y, and Z that hasn't been maintained, or you've not upgraded or done certain things to increase that maturity for the accessibility of certain features or whatever it might be. So I guess they can assist with that.
Yeah, it could also give you, something else just came to mind. It could also give you a little more well-rounded perspective of your program overall and the work that you're doing. So you work with vendor A for 2 or 3 years, for whatever reason, that relationship ends. You go work with a new consulting company, they give you a different perspective for the next year or two. And now you get we didn't approach that way for the last 2 or 3 years, but that actually makes sense. So maybe we adjust our perspective on a given thing or an approach, or the skills of that consulting company that comes in, or a different vendor. So could also just improve things overall. So
definitely, it's nice to have a crutch, I think, sometimes, and that's probably a bad turn of phrase to use on a digital accessibility podcast, isn't it? But you can, someone to lean on, and sort of assist you in the way. That's good. Right, I'm probably going to get a really big sigh from you now for this next question, or just you might even just hang up. But the European Accessibility Act.
What's that?
Never heard of it. Yeah. So we can't avoid talking about it, can we? It's this year. It's actually only months away, which is scary to think, or maybe it shouldn't be scary to think about. But how do you envisage things going with the adoption and compliance of those regulations across the EU? And I guess I'm head in the clouds, like, this is going to be great. It's really going to push things in the right direction. But do you see there being any negative impact from something that monumental being rolled out?
Well, first of all, my stress levels just spiked as soon as you mention it. And then you say a few months out. And then, so this is very much top of mind, and it has been for a minute. So wow, how to answer this? I think so. I think at the moment there's a fair amount of uncertainty in the space, and I say that broadly. The regulations reasonably, mm, as far as regulations go, straightforward, reasonably. Adopting EN 301 presents a few, EN 301549 for people that are familiar.
Thank you for the captions, by the way.
It presents a few potential challenges internally. The maturity level of an existing program or not at your company, I think could have some pretty grave impacts. I'm not going to say positive or negative. I think overall it's positive. So I'm of your mindset. I'm probably not eternally optimistic or like head in the clouds type, but like a more practical approach to the work. But um, yeah, the uncertainty bit is kind of like, well, we're asking ourselves these questions and but we have to start getting prepared for certain scenarios. And doing, frankly, a lot of things eBay hasn't had to do in the past, even though we've operated with this inclusive mindset or accessibility mindset over the years. Um, we haven't really been on the hook for a lot of reporting or completing VPATs, that sort of thing. Um, not as heavily monitoring our experiences in EU member states. Um, Naturally, we focused on larger markets. We're a global company, but it's going to present some process challenges. We have to get our things in order, we'll say. But other uncertainties, like how serious our company is going to take it. We're operating under the pretense that this is absolutely something we need to do, and we need to be prepared as best possible by June. But we also realize there's a high probability that long term we'll just be partially compliant to this regulation, and that's okay. And so we have to yield some influence or wield some influence internally and share that with new partners who we haven't worked with before, some cases like new regulation or new product regulatory and legal folks, and say, we have to get comfortable with this. And some of them aren't comfortable. So it's this funny conversation about that uncertainty or ambiguity. And some of them didn't even know we had an accessibility practice. So like, what? And then that's disappointing to hear. So then you kind of work through that. But other uncertainties, like how aggressive are the regulators going to be? The market surveillance authorities. And is that going to vary by country or region? How serious are companies going to take the fines and sanctions maybe in their given country? How different will the guidance or the laws be for each member state, because they have the flexibility to change those? And then what does that mean for us from an internal perspective? Like, what's our strategy or what's our approach to that sort of unknown or ambiguity? It's creating a lot of questions. So that's what I mean, like uncertainties around the whole of it. So yeah, that's my general thinking. I think the negative side of the question, though, I mean, I'm in the States, probably, obviously. Very litigious environment that we live in here. I don't know that that's as true in Europe. Maybe it is in certain pockets, but I don't hear about it. I'm not exposed to it. I'm hopeful that this won't lead to that. So that could be viewed as a bit of a negative outcome, like, oh, more regulation. I mean, my perspective is that something wasn't working well enough before. So now all of a sudden we need a stricter or enforcement or regulation around that thing. And it's all meant to improve the experiences for people. So like, how can that be a bad thing? So I can't think of it really in terms of too much of a negative perspective, but I could see some companies maybe being interpreted as negative. And then in the legal threats or complaints or this increase, the presumed increase in that type of thing could be deemed a bit negative. So yeah, if you could also be deemed a negative thing internally, like it's forcing. We're approaching it as a forcing factor to get more of our act together. We have great tooling. I can talk about it until I'm blue in the face, but policies and internal processes, response workflows like customer support, or like things that we admittedly need to put a little more attention into. I think this will help. So also, it won't always be Mark and the accessibility team as the bearers of bad news, or the sort of internal, hey, this is a regulation now we have to meet. And so here's how we're setting that up, and here are our policies. And now it's a slightly different internal world to navigate. So it's making sure well, we could have an EAA session for an hour, but I'm hopeful it will create a little more rigor around our practices and processes and help us um, improve the accessibility of our site and apps overall. And it's not just about site and apps. So that's the other part of the conversation. The EAA is beyond just making your site and apps accessible. So that's really what we focused on the last 10 plus years.
Mm.
So when a new regulation comes up and our regulatory and legal folks hear about it, and leadership says, isn't that what the team already does? And I'm like, yeah, we do one piece. Like there's these other pieces. So like, it's just managing that environment now. It's a different, some ways, many different conversations than what we've had in the past.
Yeah.
But again, back to the culture of the company and learning and having an open mindset and a growth mindset. I think we're set up in a good position. And I think those companies that have an existing program, even if it's 2 people, it's okay. It's small. Well, I can relate. Hopefully puts you in a position of being able to adapt or respond to these unknown inquiries as they come in, or what they're going to entail, and just have some sort of plan in place or some sort of response, I think is a big part of this work. We're beyond that, but we still have to do a lot of it ourselves. So even though we have a relatively mature program, there's a lot that still gets my stress levels raised. So take a breath, prioritize things, find your partners, and just work through it. So
Awesome.
it's a lot.
I like that you started that response with, as a regulation, it's pretty straightforward. And then it was like this and then this and then.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
awesome. No, it's really helpful, very insightful. And I think that's a nice way to approach it. It's just like, like you say, take a breath. And I mean, the world isn't going to end, and we have to make mistakes and be told what mistakes we're making before we can actually put things right. So I think it may also help, like you said, bring those things to light in certain companies that may not have given it that much thought, and improve. And then hopefully we'll all be working towards that. Maybe it will do us out of jobs. Who knows? But great. So I mean that, like you say, stepping back and taking a deep breath, and the stress levels in terms of new regulation brings me on to a very important point, and that is on burnout, which I think we discuss pretty much as in some element on every single episode of this podcast. It's a shame that is the case, but I just wanted to approach it with you, and if you're comfortable sharing, obviously being head of digital accessibility or director of accessibility at eBay, have you experienced that firsthand? But is in your role, is there anything that you sort of do to sort of try and identify that in your team or help them to avoid it?
Yeah, it's definitely a thing for sure, and not just our industry. I mean, other industries, people get burned out for sure. I think for the most part, it's a very personal sort of thing, and everybody experiences. Well, we all know this, right? We're humans. We experience life differently. So how can we recognize it, and early enough that you can sort of respond to it in a meaningful way to alleviate any of the symptoms that are coming on as a result of that burnout? I have a difficult time, just in full transparency. I've always had this. Probably it's changed as I've gotten older now, but I say it's changed, and yet I'm still checking email at 10 and 11 p.m. at night. So I've always had this, we'll say, unhealthy relationship with work, where I feel like, and especially in this connected world, we all kind of end up, if you work in tech, you're almost always connected unless you're super strict about your time boxing and sticking to that. I'm awful at that, and so I can admit that. But that leads to potential for overworking, or I don't know whatever phrase to put on it. But then, of course, all the things that come with that stress, the heaviness that you feel sometimes, you're never getting enough things done, or your list is always a list, and what can you really work through? And there's a lot of strategies out there and approaches to managing your time and your day and your work and your life and your family and all of those things. Um, I guess I've been kind of fortunate. I don't know that I guess if I'm really being honest, I think that I'm probably getting there now. But then I start to question, is that a bit of a recency bias or an association with the increased um, amount of times it's been discussed over the past year, 2 years, 5 years? Like, it's probably always been a thing, but it's only made its way more into, I don't say mainstream, that's kind of a loaded term, but uh, we we've been made more aware of it. I also, it's not lost on me that different cultures may have different approach. Like, it may not even be a thing in certain cultures where there's all that proper work-life balance thing that happens, and we don't. Again, I don't want to reference too much U.S. culture, but like it's very, at least in maybe certain generations, instilled upon you at an early age. Hey, you want to live a certain lifestyle or live a certain way, or have certain things. I'm not really a materialistic person, but you still want comfort and roof and food and like basics. Things get expensive. Well, how do you get those things? Well, you got to go perform some skill or role or something to get compensated for that. So you, it starts early on, and so there's this whole side of me that likes enjoys those types of conversations. Like, well, how did we get to where we are, and why are we here, and how can we adjust that in that perspective? And then the whole business and capitalistic side of it comes in, and like, how many hours a week are we actually dedicating to ourselves and not the well-being of a company or an entity in some way? So, and that's not to say I don't love my job and I like what eBay's about. We said this early on, but like, how do you just find that place to balance that work and life stuff reasonably well? And so I don't know that it's hit me more recently. I've had a really, um, without sharing too much detail, but like a really tough, probably last 4 years overall. And it has nothing to do with the pandemic. Now that exacerbated some things, the tail end there, but um, it just puts an additional weight, uh, for lack of a better word, into your day to day, because you want to perform your job well in general. I think most people do. I know that life event thing that had happened to me really impacted my output, and I'm sure my team feels it. And I know I see it. I'm hoping that it's not as obvious, but I feel that it's causing me to procrastinate, or it's caused me to deliver maybe less polished work, or less polished executive or leadership updates, or less input into what we should be thinking about, or strategy related, or the tactical bits day to day, or keeping up with the details of a regulation, or just the sort of all of it. um, my personal life really impacted my work life, and so I think in a way that, I guess, I mean, really, I'm also, we're not getting younger by the day, so yeah. I mean, maybe I'm getting to that point. I don't know. I haven't. I don't want this to turn into a therapy session, Joe. But yeah, like, say,
Yeah, no, it's great.
how do we have those open conversations? And the tail end of your question there was like, well, how are some ways you maybe recognize in your team, and what are some things that you try to do? And really, I have a pretty, I like to think I'm a pretty approachable person. Like, we can have conversations about anything, or let's go for a walk around campus, or, well, oftentimes it's on Zoom these days, but or let's go grab a drink, or what have you. And I shared what I was going through in my life with my team, and but they were one of the only groups of people that knew at the company. And so, how did I manage expectations from external people who didn't know maybe what I was going through? We don't know what they're going through either, but just just managing through that. And if I recognize any of the signs that I think someone might be going through on my team, we just stop the conversation. Like, hey, let's just pause for a moment. Like, are you good? Are you in a good space right now? Like, or do you need a moment, or do you need time, or do you need the day? Take the day. I don't care. Like, work's work. Like, at the end of the day, if you're not healthy, uh, if you don't have a healthy mindset, or your mental health is somewhat challenged, or you're distracted by something else, or your kids not feeling great, or you're not feeling great, or your spouse, or what have you, um, don't take care of that. That shit's way more important than the stuff we're doing here day to day. Even though we impact millions of people's lives, it's important. Agreed. We can't do that if we're not in a right headspace. So
100%.
yeah, I don't know if there's real specific things that I do, but it's mostly that. It's mostly talking through those things and just giving them the space to either vent if they need to. And sometimes that involves prying questions, which I'm not really great at because I don't like to pry in some ways, but I can ask enough open-ended questions, I think, that will get at what's going on in your head at the moment, if you're willing to share that with me. And so we talk through it.
Yeah, that's really important. Thank you for sharing as well. And I'm not going to pry anymore either. But I think it's been something that's happened with me recently as well. So I was very fortunate that my boss, my current boss, Jane, she had also gone through a very similar sort of event in her personal life, not too long before what happened with me and my partner, and she recognized that quite quickly, probably before. And then I think she was better through her own life experience. She was then better geared towards knowing how to help because she kind of thought, well, I needed this. I needed time, or I needed flexible hours, or someone to just talk to, or actually someone to help me structure my day to be like, well, actually, it might be a nice distraction if you can just get this bit done. It takes your mind off things, but then you've still got time to deal with your personal life sort of thing. So, and that's because she'd learnt from her own. But sometimes, and it's a blessing if you go through life and you don't have too much going on like that in your life. But
It does
it's
give you a different
yeah,
perspective, right? I mean, that's actually a good point too. Yeah, because maybe I am projecting a bit of what I've gone through. I don't know if it's projecting in a bad way, but like
sure, yeah.
being able to recognize maybe certain things. And yeah, that's interesting.
It may have changed your sort of approach to certain things in a way, or
A lot.
yeah.
We could have another podcast about that. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah, your approach to life in general changes dramatically if it's a pretty severe event or a traumatic thing. And so, I mean, there's people can relate to it's a whole spectrum of traumatic events that could happen. So
Absolutely.
yeah, definitely impacts them.
Well, mate, thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, I guess to lighten the mood, I'll bring it back to final thoughts. So if there's anything that you'd like to share with the listeners, or with me, any upcoming events or initiatives, anything that you're passionate about really that's going on, then feel free.
Yeah. Well, yeah, just appreciate the time again. Yeah, the chat's been nice. It was good meeting you. Maybe we'll meet up again soon. There is an event coming up. I mean, a lot of your listeners know about CSUN. We're actually attending. We'll have a small group from eBay going. We're doing a little talk there as well. So if you see us in any eBay gear or whatever, or you recognize us, come up and say hi. Introduce yourself. We're always up for meeting people in the in this space in general. No real big initiatives come to mind. Oh, something did, like a couple weeks back before Christmas. My teammate and I got contacted by somebody internal that we hadn't met, and they informed us that eBay has become a corporate partner for Disability In, which is an interesting organization. If you're not aware of, check them out. And so I'm excited about where that goes. I'm just not sure where it goes, but it didn't come at the behest of us. It wasn't our influence. Well, maybe I'm definitely not taking credit for it because we mentioned Disability In like 2 or 3 years ago. Like, hey, this is something eBay should probably be involved in. Would you consider that VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion? Like, this seems right up your alley. It's not all about digital accessibility; it's about workforce and improving the lives of people with disability in general.
Nice.
So that's kind of exciting. Yeah, no real big personal projects. Just working on myself, continue physical, mental health, and finding that balance, and bringing everything you can bring to your role. And yeah, that's all. Just kind of it's a job at maintaining that alone, not just your job. So you have to work on yourself. So yeah, it's a great
Yeah.
conversation. I appreciate it. Yeah, I know it's kind of random thoughts in there. There's a lot of things on my mind now. I'm sure I have another call in 5 minutes, but
Well, no, I know how busy you are, and yeah, just really appreciate all the time you've put into this. And yeah, we'll stay in touch. I'll put some links. I'll put a link to a Disability In and other bits as well, just so people can sort of research that and look into it. But yeah, thank you so much for your insights and all the work you're doing in the accessibility space. eBay clearly has a huge impact on so many people. So yeah, and I look forward to hopefully collaborating more in the future as well. So yeah.
Sounds good.